Hello, welcome back to another episode of Make Thrift Buy, the show where you send in suggestions of cool clothing or accessories that you've seen on the internet, and then I do my best to recreate them. Today's episode was suggested by LXI DIY13, who wanted me to try and recreate this animal face shoulder bag. The one that was suggested to me is from a cheap wholesale website called SANDR, but you can basically find these things like everywhere. You can find them in all different sizes, from very large tote bags to really small coin purses, and you can also find them for worryingly cheap. Like, I found these purses on eBay for 93 cents, and that includes free shipping. Now, when something is this cheap, it makes me a little bit worried about exactly how much the person who made it was getting paid. Besides, it looked like something that would be a really fun challenge to try and recreate for myself. So, let's begin. So the first thing that I needed to do was to find an image of an animal's face. I went onto a royalty-free image website and I typed in puppy. Sorry cat people, but I wanted to make a dog face bag instead. Now, the best type of image for this project will be an animal that has a really round head and sticky up ears. So, like this one, or this, or this, or this. However, this French bulldog won my heart, and it was also a perfect image to use because it had a really round head, very sticky up ears, and a white background which would be easy to remove. Next, I opened up the image in Photoshop and I removed the background and the body. Then I carefully separated the ears from the image so that they were separate from the head. I also made the ears a little bit smaller in relation to the head because I didn't want giant ears on my bag. I saved the image as a high quality JPEG, opened it up in a Word document, and then printed it out onto photo transfer paper, along with a bunch of other images that I'm going to use for future projects because I don't like to waste my photo transfer paper on blank space. This stuff isn't that cheap. Speaking of wasting photo transfer paper, the first printing didn't go so well. I tried to fix this dodgy print job with a black marker, but I'm not the artist I thought I was, and this looked, let's be honest, really bad. So I needed to print out another. Now, when you're printing your image, make sure that you select the highest quality printing possible. This is where I went wrong before. Now this is much better. Then I also decided that the head needed to be a bit bigger anyway, so I printed out a third. And I guess that'll make a coin purse out of the smaller one. Anyway, as you can see, I cut out and separated the head and the ear pieces. And then I peeled the backing paper off the photo transfers. Then, with this cotton linen material that I thrifted, I cut out pieces of fabric that were a bit larger than my images. And then I ironed both the head and the ears onto their respective bits of linen fabric to transfer the images onto the fabric. Then I used some fabric scissors to cut the fabric to the same shape as the images, leaving about ½ an inch of fabric border around the edges. Then I worked out all the different pieces that I was going to need for my bag. So, for the ears, I cut out 2 more pieces of black linen that were identical in shape to the ears that I've already cut out. Then I placed each ear and its identical back piece right sides together, and then I sewed them together like this. Then I cut off the excess fabric outside of the stitches, and I turned the ears the right way around so that the photo transfer is on the outside. For the front face section, I grabbed this thick, fake, leathery material that I already owned, and I cut out a piece that was identical in size to the face piece. This backing made out of this stiff material is basically going to help the bag maintain its shape. Then I sewed the two together, wrong sides together, like this, leaving a gap down the bottom. Through the gap, I filled the piece with a little bit of stuffing, which will also help it maintain its shape. The next step is attaching the ears, which I attached to the front piece like this. I know this looks like you're sewing them on upside down, but just wait, this will all make sense at the end. I also cut off the excess fabric at the ends of the ears. Now, in the next few steps, these ears will need to stay down, out of the way, on front of the bag like this. Now I'm going to attach my bag strap. With 52 inches of bag strap material, whatever you call this stuff, I secured the strap onto the front of the face piece. I attached it using paper clips so that I wouldn't pierce through the photo transfer with pins. Making sure first that the strap wasn't twisted, I then sewed it onto the front of the bag like this. Then I gathered up all of the bag strap and I secured it with an elastic band. Like the ears, this will also have to stay out of the way in the next few steps. Finally, the front piece was finished and the bag making can begin. Now, the method that I'm going to use to make my bag is extremely similar to how I made this fluffy clutch back in episode 32. Now, if you're wanting to try and make this round bag, I highly recommend that you try it out using rectangles first, using the same method that I did with my clutch. So, in order to make my bag, I'm going to need my outer front piece, an outer back piece, for which I am also using fake leather, and front and back lining pieces. I'm also going to need a zipper. Now, the zipper is best if it's the same color as your photo transfer, but unfortunately I didn't have any black zippers that were long enough, so I had to use this thrifted cream colored one instead. Now, the first step of making a simple bag like this is to attach the front pieces to the zipper. So first, I laid down the lining piece and then I touched the zipper with the zipper facing up to the lining. Now it helps here if you use a zipper foot on your sewing machine, and you can also unzip the zipper because that will make sewing around the curve a little bit easier. As you can see, my zipper is a little bit longer than I needed it to be, so I just let it go off the edges like this. As long as you leave the zip part in the middle, this will work fine. Next, it was time for me to attach the front piece, which I placed right side down on top of the zipper, and then I sewed it on like this. This is probably the most difficult part to sew together, so I unzipped the zipper and I went really slowly. Once that was all sewn together, I flipped the lining over to the other side so that the zipper was free. The next step is to essentially do the same thing again. I placed the lining down, then I put the zipper on, right side up, and I sewed them together like this. Next comes the outer back piece, which is placed right sides down, and then sewn on like this. Then, again, I flipped the lining on the back piece around to the other side. And now I have something that almost resembles a bag. Kind of. Now the next thing that I did was to place the front and the back outer pieces right sides together. Move the lining up and out of the way, and then I sewed the front and back outer pieces together like this. Then I pulled the lining up and above the bag as far as I could. And as you can see, this is rather difficult to do on a circular shaped purse. And then I sewed the lining pieces together like this with a large gap in the middle. Then, through that hole in the lining, I pulled everything the right way around. And, from what looked like a big old mess just a moment ago, I got something which actually looked almost like a finished bag. The only part which still needed sewing together is the small gaps at the side, which I wasn't able to sew together earlier because of the bag's roundness. Basically, all I have to do is to hand sew the gaps together using a needle and black thread like this. Now with the outer section of the bag all sewn up, the last step was to pull out the lining and sew the gap closed. Then I put the lining back into the bag, zipped it up, and I am done. So, how did I go? So this was the final product, or products, and I couldn't be happier with how they turned out. They turned out so well. This project is a definite. The only frustrating thing was that the size of the bag is kind of limited to the size of an A4 sheet of paper because that's all my printer can handle. I couldn't think of a way to make it bigger without actually going and purchasing printed fabric, which is kind of expensive. So I was wondering if any of you had an idea of a way that I would be able to make this bigger at home without just having to stick two transfer sheets together, because there would be a line right down the middle. It'd look kind of dodgy. If you have any ideas, then I'd love to hear them. Let me know in the comments below. Now, I want to address an issue that I know is going to come up if previous YouTube comments are anything to go by. Each of these cost me around about $5 each to make. And while one of the points of this series is to make fashion more accessible by showing you how you can recreate items from the high street for a fraction of the cost, that is not the main point of this series. Another extremely important reason that I do this series is to reject the culture of fast fashion. And if something like a coin purse only costs you 93 cents to make and then ship halfway across the world to your doorstep, something seriously wrong is going on here. The person who made it is most likely working in awful sweatshop conditions, or they're a child, or they're working under slave labor. And I cannot support any company that would allow its workers to be treated that way in order just to sell people who are more well off cheap stuff. And that is half of the reason that I make my own things. Be conscious of where your stuff is coming from. And ending on that kind of political note, it's now time to say goodbye. Tag me on Instagram using the hashtag DIY Annika if you try out any of my projects, and if you haven't already, then go check out my Patreon page. My Patreon supporters are amazing. Because of their support, I've been able to buy my camera a new camera lens, which is what is currently filming me right now, because my old lens was broken. My Patreon supporters are literally the reason that you are watching this video right now. To give back to my Patreon supporters, I have exclusive vlogs, Google Hangouts giveaways, sneak peeks of projects, and behind the scenes footage. So consider to help me to keep making these videos by supporting me on Patreon. You're all beautiful, and I'll see you all for my next video. Bye!